Hey, it's Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company and Ink Nouveau. I am here doing a video on Noodler's 54th Massachusetts, which is a blue-black ink that is probably one of the best inks that I can remember coming out in recent times. It's probably as exciting to me as Black Swan and Australian Roses was. It's a completely different ink than that one is, but it's as useful and revolutionary to me as that ink was when it came out, I don't know, 2 years ago, somewhere thereabouts. But anyway, it's a wonderful ink, so I'm here to review it, give you a little bit of backstory on the ink, the history behind the label. If you want to actually learn more about the history and stuff like that, I recommend you check out Nathan Tardis' video. He's the guy that made the ink, and he's got a lot of history. He's got family ties that date back to this history as well. So kind of cool backstory, but then the ink itself is also really awesome. So that's what I'm here to show you today. So let's check it out together. Noodler's 54th Massachusetts is standard price, Noodler's bottle, $12.50 for 3 ounce, which is pretty darn good value as far as fountain pen inks go. What's really exciting about this ink, aside from the label and the history and stuff, which is pretty cool, is the fact that it is a really quite a permanent blue-black ink. And blue-black inks in general are quite popular, just because, you know, black tends to be like the most popular just because it's very universal and people can use it at work and on all kinds of legal documents and stuff. Blue-black tends to be kind of the next most popular color because it's also very work appropriate and safe color to use on a lot of documents and stuff. But anyway, 54th Massachusetts is one of Nathan's latest creations as of well, I'm shooting this video a little bit later than I normally would, but this ink came out in, I think was it late October 2012. So you've got basically 54th Massachusetts is a regiment of the Civil War of the Union Army that was the first all African American regiment. And basically the whole premise behind what they're fighting about is that they were promised equal pay with white soldiers, and they were not given equal pay. So this whole upset was them fighting to get equal pay. They were recruited by abolitionists during the Civil War and fought, you know, for the Union side and wanted to be paid accordingly. So that's what they were fighting for. A lot of the background to this and Nathan's inspiration is about land ownership, equal rights, you know, things like that. And he's got some quotes on here that kind of align with that. Let's see here. It's really small, but I think I can get you to see a little bit. Too many of our comrades' bones lie bleaching near the walls of Fort Wagner to subtract even 1 cent from our hard-earned pay. That's James Henry Gooding. And then he's got another quote on here from Frederick Douglass. It starts over here. It says, "I know no class of my fellow men, however just, enlightened, and humane, which can be wisely and safely trusted absolutely with the liberties of any other class." So that's kind of the whole theme, and then he's got a quote on here that's, I don't know, it's a quote, it's just a saying, "Freedom forever and serfdom never." So it's all about freedom, independence, and equality, and that tends to be kind of a running theme with a lot of the Noodler's politically charged ink labels, which is, you know, it's kind of hard to argue. It's kind of a good theme as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so that's the political stuff, you know, and you can see. And the artwork on the label is actually really, really cool too. So really nice label. But anyway, as far as the ink itself goes, 54th Massachusetts, here it is. I did a review of it similar to some other reviews I've done. I used Rhodia 80-gram dot pad white paper. It's a little more ink resistant than most papers you'll probably interact with in your daily life, so keep that in mind. It tends to take longer to dry and tends to smear a little more than it would on most papers. But anyway, the pen I used for this test was a Lamy All-Star, which I actually have inked up with something else right now. But I do currently have it inked up in my Blue Pilot Custom 74. So that's what I'll be using here in a minute. But just to go over my review that I did a smear test where I just wrote a few lines, weighted the labeled time, and then smeared my finger across it. It dried for the most part around 20 seconds. It would still smear a little bit. So it's kind of a little on the long side on a paper like Rhodia. That's not incredibly uncommon for an ink color that's this deep and saturated, and as well one that is permanent. They can take a little bit of time to dry. The way that these Noodler's inks, and this is classified as a bulletproof ink, the way that this ink actually attains its permanence is through cellulose reaction. So it actually absorbs into the paper and reacts with the cellulosic fibers of the paper to create a permanent bond. So when you have an ink-resistant paper or something like a heavily sized watercolor paper or something like that, the Noodler's inks take longer to dry because it's not able to absorb into the paper as easily. A little fact for you. My drip test here, I just did some crosses here with the, I did like a grid pattern here with the ink, and then I put some drops of water on it. I waited about a minute, I put some drops of water on it, and then waited maybe 30-45 seconds, something like that, with the water just sitting on it, and then wiped it up. And you probably can't even tell that I did the water test, but I did, I swear. I got a little tiny bit of smearing right there, where I kind of like rubbed it as I was taking the water up. But other than that, I mean, geez, it's untouched. And then I took a wet Q-tip and smeared it across and rubbed it across here. You can kind of see a little hint of smearing there, but it's still, I would say, 95% totally untouched. So this is an incredibly, incredibly water-resistant ink in a pretty short period of time on very ink-resistant paper. So this just like passes with flying colors. You know, other than Noodler's Black, this is one of the best performing water-resistant inks that I've seen in a while. My swab here, I did a single pass, a double and a triple pass, just to show you how saturated the color is. And it's pretty saturated because the first swab that I did is a little bit lighter than the second and third pass, but even still, it's pretty darn saturated and doesn't give you a whole lot of shading, so you don't get a whole lot of color variation while you're writing. So I kind of summarize everything here. Dry time, 20 plus seconds, saturation's high, water resistance is very high. The ease of cleaning I put as medium because it is a bulletproof ink, and it can, especially if you leave it in your pen for a long time or if it dries out in your pen, it can take a little bit of work to clean it up, but it's not too bad. If you use a little bit of dish detergent or maybe like a pen flush of some kind, it just cleans right up. It's not a problem. Shading is low. And the flow I put is medium. It's probably more medium to wet. Depends on the pen that you have it in. It doesn't gush out of the pen, but it's a pretty solid flow. So not dry writing by any means. So that about sums it up. And then I swapped out my medium Lamy All-Star nib with an extra fine and a broad just to show you how it can look with a really fine nib and a very wet one. So it does darken up a bit as it gets wetter. Not incredibly surprising. That's kind of how most inks are. And then just to kind of test it out, I didn't do anything elaborate, but I used some other paper just to give you an idea of what kind of dry time we'd be looking at. This paper is HP 24-pound laser jet. It's pretty regularly available. It comes in a 500-page ream. This is what we use, at least at the moment, to print our invoices at Goulet Pen Company. And it's pretty much in line with the Rhodia. I got some smearing, up to 30 seconds, and that's not incredibly surprising. But then on the, I have this Mead, notebook. It's just a, kind of a cheap like college rule, kind of thing that is pretty absorbent paper. And I use that on here, and it looks completely drastically different, almost like I used a different ink. In terms of the dry time compared to the other paper, and this just goes to show you how much of a difference that paper can make. Same ink, and I didn't get a lot of feathering or anything. I did get some spread. That's not unusual with absorbent paper, for it to get a little fatter line, for the color to look a little less vibrant. It's a little more muted. That is completely normal. But even still, it held pretty well on that cheaper paper. But the dry time is phenomenal on the cheaper paper. So I would say this is a pretty good one to use on cheaper paper. And then on the back, I did get some bleed through, not incredibly surprising. The medium nib on this pen is not super wet, but it's probably a little on the wet side because it's got a gold nib. I've been using it for a while. I tend to write kind of heavy, so it does write a little wetter than a new pen would. But there you go. So it does get some bleed through. If you're using a finer nib, it's not going to be as bad. but a lot of inks bleed through with this paper. And just to show you that I didn't actually, well, I'll show you how I write with this thing. Let me zoom in here a little bit. So on the cheaper paper, okay, so we got, there you go, just like that. And then to show you how quickly it dries, I can pretty much smear my finger right across it afterwards, and it does not smear. A little bit different story on the other paper, but when you're writing on, you know, a more ink-resistant paper, then you can see it's going to get a little tighter line. I tend to write on more less absorbent papers myself on a regular basis. Most people who have, you know, a work situation where you don't necessarily get to choose your own paper, you usually end up with paper more like this. So, you know, probably use this as more of a judge for what it would perform like. But thankfully here, I get to choose the paper, so we use good stuff. But anyway, so that's 54th Massachusetts. There are some comparable colors to it. Nothing that I found that was like a deadlock match for these colors. So there's 54th I did in a swab. I've got this up in the swab shop. Some ones that were similar to it, I've got Diamond Denim, which is a little more purple, not quite as dark and gray as 54th. Roaring Klinger Verdigris is a little darker and more saturated. It's got a little bit of a green hue to it, but it's Roaring Klinger's pretty close match. Noodler's Blue Black is kind of close to Verdigris, a little vibrant, a little more of a green color to it, but sort of similar. Noodler's Midnight Blue, that's very much more of a true dark blue, but I thought it'd be good to compare. Bad Belted Kingfisher, that's a really popular, you know, waterproof blue-black that I thought would be good to compare. So it's definitely, 54th has more of a gray color to it than Bad Belted Kingfisher, for sure. But the advantage you're going to have with 54th over Kingfisher, Kingfisher tends to feather, you know, worse on absorbent paper and stuff. So 54th does hold up better than Bad Belted Kingfisher does. So that's, I like it. I think we're going to have a lot of converts over from Bad Belted Kingfisher for those that want a waterproof blue-black. And then Roaring Klinger Liebsiger Schwartz, that's more of a black-gray, but it's got a little bit of blue in it, so I thought I'd show that. And then Private Reserve Sonic Blue, it's kind of more than Midnight Blue scheme, but it was the closest PR color that I could find, so I thought it would be worth mentioning. So when it comes to blue-blacks, it's not often that you get a blue-black that is really permanent. Usually the water resistance can be a little better with blue-blacks than some of the other colors, some of the brighter blues, or you know, other colors like reds, especially greens, pinks, stuff like that. Blues tend to do better, I think, maybe just because of the dye family that these blues fall in. There's a little more options for water resistance and stuff. But it's not so easy to find one that is so water resistant like this one. And I know that it's kind of like the holy grail for a lot of fountain pen users to get an ink that you can literally just dump water in or soak it in water, run it under the faucet, and it won't move. And this ink definitely is one of those. So at this point, you know, the ink's been out for a month and a half, and we've gotten tremendous feedback. It's just an immensely popular ink, and I think it's going to continue to be so for quite a long time. But if you haven't heard about it yet, I definitely recommend you check it out. It's going to become a classic staple blue-black in the fountain pen community. I'm just calling it now. So that is my review of Noodler's 54th Massachusetts, and I'm a fan of the ink. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. If you got any questions about 54th Massachusetts, or anything else for that matter, you can just leave a comment here, and I'd be happy to answer it for you. Thanks so much, and right on.